Good evening, viewers. Welcome once again to this channel, Joe Mwai's channel, a channel that is dedicated towards bringing you insights in matters relating our spirituality, who we are, not as what we see when we stand in front of the mirror, but who we are as thinkers, as the inner man, as intelligence, as mind, as intelligence being. I have dedicated over 25 years in research that has brought me to a wonderful and great discovery on matters relating to the different gods that we are offered by the different religions, a multitude of different religions throughout the world today. And being born from a Christian background, I grew up believing that the Christian God is the ultimate, is the original God, is the most superior God. But as I grew up, and became an adult and a grown-up person, and started my own study of the Bible, I started to come across some areas that were contradictory or that did not make sense to me. For example, I came across two different types of creation in the book of Genesis, where chapter 2 around verse 6, we have the first creation where the maker said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness, and thus man became a living being. And then further down chapter 2, we find or we see the same creator appearing now to have form, because the first creation I've just talked about is a spiritual creation. Now in further down chapter 2, we start to see the creator appearing to have a form by what we are told. For we are told that the creator now collected dust together and appeared to mix it with water to get mud. And with the mud that he got, he molded what appears as the human form or human body, and then made some two holes and breathed his breath onto man. And according to chapter 2 of Genesis, then man became a living being or had his life. So those are two very contradictory aspects of creation. But I relied more on the first aspect of creation, and is the creation that I would want us to focus upon. But then as I moved along, I came to understand that the Christian God and the God of Israel, whether they are two or one and the same God, but they are very, very contradictory. One, we are told that he is a wrathful God. We are told that he's a jealous God. We are told that he's a God that has made a place, a very, very evil place for man, for those who sin, to be put for eternity, to burn and suffer for eternity without reprieve. Then we also shown that this God is a God who is not a respecter of persons. Yet elsewhere he claimed to bless who he choose to bless. I will bless who I will. I will bless who I choose to bless. And that tends to justify the variation, the disparity between those who have and those who have not. And as if that's not enough, the same God appeared to console those in oppression by commanding a slave to obey his master. And we know what slaves went through in older times, the kind of suffering, the kind of humiliations, the kind of torture, all the things that they went through, yet they are asked to obey their master. A God who is not a respecter of persons, a God who has created us all in his image and in his likeness, notwithstanding the fact that he, amongst all the created human beings in the world, he chose one specific tribe to be his special people. And a lot of things that followed that would be considered inhuman today, and that causes conflict throughout a certain part of the world as a result of the mess that he made. But then that's not all. We are shown that this God, who is not a respecter of persons, is a God who have set up laws that we may follow. But before he set up the laws, he first of all put the first man that he made in a place called Garden of Eden. And in this place called Garden of Eden, man was put there, but was told that there's one tree whose fruit he must never eat, and that tree was planted at the center of the garden. Very significant. But then, and he wasn't told why he shouldn't eat it, but then some beasts, some animals, some other creatures, including Satan, knew or had a reason of why the tree was planted at the center of the garden and why it should not be eaten by man. But then temptation, and man eats the fruit. And as a result of that, God sent him away from the Garden of Eden and cursed him. Not only him, but generations after generations that followed, thousands and thousands of years later to the present day, we still suffer as a result of that. But then, as if that's not enough, this God is said to be omnipresence, everywhere presence. Yet, when he came, or we are told that he would come in the cool of the day at the Garden of Eden to visit the man that he had created, to visit, which nullifies omnipresence, which means that he was not omnipresent in that garden. I would visit. Did not even know that Adam had eaten of the fruit that he had been commanded not to eat. First thing is that in his omnipresence and omniscience, knowingness, he did not know that. He did not even know where Adam was. He had to call him out. He had to ask him, where are you? Have you eaten of the fruit that I commanded ye not to eat? In surprise, something that he didn't know, he didn't have prior knowledge as an omniscience God, all-knowing, without a past, present, or the future, and infinite, instantaneous now. Yet, he does not appear to know that Adam had done this and had to inquire from him. And so all these things did not make sense to me, and it prompted me to wonder. And I first of all discovered that I was born with very, very unique features. a desire to know the truth, an ability to think very deeply, and therefore came to realize that I'm a deep thinker and I'm a seeker of truth. And I think about infinity, for example. And I say that if one is omnipresence, which is the meaning of infinity, then he will have no beginning, he will have no end. He will have no place outside of himself to place man in a place where he would visit him in the cool of the day, because his ability to visit to a place implies finitude. Also, an omnipresence God implies one out of time, one who is instantaneously, infinitely, and instantaneously present, without a yesterday, tomorrow, but instantaneous now. And that gives him the ability to be omniscient, to know everything instantaneously. So when we see these disparities, they bothered me a lot. And that aspect of infinitude as a deep thinker troubled me for many days, until I came to understand. And before I came to understand, I also questioned on whether we could be faced with different dimensions of consciousness, where God could be omnipresence in a dimension of consciousness different from our dimension of consciousness. And that in itself presented a problem, because if that be the case, then it would imply that his omnipresence is not truly omnipresence, because it is only omnipresence in a certain dimension and not in other dimensions. So for something that is infinite and omnipresence, in order for it to qualify 100% as omnipresence or infinite, then that something has to occupy every space in every way, every aspect of dimension in every way. So these aspects of disparities troubled me a lot. And then I got to the aspect of that omniscience, the knowingness, which again implies knowing everything, that there is nothing in the present that he doesn't know, nothing in the future that he doesn't know, nothing in the past that he doesn't know. And that is then made possible by an infinite, instantaneous now, an ever-presence. So these things fail to make sense in a God who would visit, or who would first put his created man, whom he has created in his likeness and in his image as his highest representation, in a garden where he is not. At the same time, the same Bible says that God does not dwell amongst men. So even though he's omnipresence, but he is not quite omnipresence, because there is somewhere he has put men where he is not. And men have to pray in order for him to answer their prayers. They have to call upon him to come, and he would come, answer his prayer, or send his angels and answer the prayers or deliver the messages, and then that's it. So until the time that man will go back to that omnipresence heaven where God is. So that did not make sense. And when I started to do my research, I came to also understand that in order for God to qualify as an omnipresence, and so there is so much contradiction which did not make sense to me, because an infinite God has to be infinite in his nature too. And what that means is that he is infinite in his qualities, in his characteristics, as well as attributes. And the attributes are okay because the attributes are God from the Bible, are omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience. But the qualities, for example, the qualities of compassion, an attribute or a quality of God, should also be infinite. So if he is a compassionate God, because of his infinite nature, he should be infinitely compassionate. If he is humble, his humility should then be infinite. If he is kind or gentle or generous or patient, he should be infinitely so. If he's a loving God, then he should be infinitely loving. And for an infinitely loving God, he cannot have any space for him to be wrathful, for him to be jealous, for him to be angry. And therefore, in that regards, his love would nullify any aspect of him that would even think of putting man in hell or even in a place outside the Garden of Eden, the metaphorical Garden of Eden, as I know it, because his love would subdue any form of anger. He won't, because he's not in time. The reason why I get angry and other times I'm loving and happy and kind and gentle is because I'm in time. And therefore at one time I can have this kind of a mood. At the other time I can have a different kind of mood based on my mental attitude, based on different circumstances, environment. For example, I could be miserable because I'm outside in the rain, but if I walked into the house, then I'm no longer miserable. I could be happy, and that is because of the aspect of time and space. But here is a God who is not in time and space, because if he's infinite in his omnipresence, he must be conscious of his infinitesimal point, the smallest point of his being, instantaneously throughout his infinite existence. And that means that he would know what is happening at an infinite, a very small point of his being, at one point of infinity, as he would know of another at another point of infinity, without time at all. And so when this then does not fit in a God, then I, as a person, as a deep thinker, as a seeker of truth, then I start to wonder, and I get lost. And this is how I started to search on whether, and to research on whether there is such a God, or that kind of a God who is infinite in every way. And the first thing that I came to understand is that in order for a God to be infinite and infinitely spiritual, then he would have to be infinitely to be able to infinitely create only of his kind, which would mean that whatever he creates or calls into being is spiritual, not material, because that's a contradiction of his qualities, characteristics, and attributes. And because he doesn't have anywhere outside his infinitude to go and get material that is opposite of his spirituality in order to make the material universe, then it implies that the material universe is an illusion. It has no reality in the presence of this infinite God who is infinitely spiritual. And that's the only way that he qualifies to be infinite and infinitely spiritual. And then the aspect of his spirituality had to be in me, had to be clearly defined. And I came to understand spirituality as the intelligence of such a maker, which intelligence occupies everything in every way. So it's an infinite intelligence. And such an infinite intelligence, which is the intelligence that gives him the ability of his own self-consciousness at every infinitesimal point of his self-consciousness to infinity, then that is what gives him his infinitude, his consciousness. And that self-consciousness, which is the ability to process thought, is what now gives him his own being, or brings him to existence, which means that intelligence is existence and the only reality of existence. And so that started to make sense and to show that the material aspect of being is an illusion. Not an illusion of God, but an illusion of what he had made. And the example of what I mean by this is, for example, when a mother has a baby on her laps, and she's swaying the baby on her lap, and the baby is sleeping. And as far as the mother is concerned, the baby is asleep. But as the baby is being swayed, the baby is in a dream state. It is dreaming. And where it is dreaming, possibly it's dreaming being chased by wild animals or beasts and, some nightmares. But as far as the mother is concerned, the baby is here, fast asleep and, peacefully asleep. But the mind of the baby has deviated. It has gone into another realm, independently of its mother. And therefore, the man who is made as the highest representative, highest presentation, as well as highest spiritual manifestation as his maker, fell asleep. And in the sleep, he then deviated from focusing his mind on highest dimension of consciousness, which is now the realm of heaven, or realm of spirituality, or realm of intelligence of God, in whom he is made in his likeness. And in his stray of a mind that was asleep, a dream state of mind, he is held captive by a deceiver who then start feeding that mind with ideas of an external nature, and in the process purport to give man a body, but he, in a sense, It is the captivity to capture his mind and feed him with ideas of an external nature that is opposite and everything the opposite of the spiritual nature of the kingdom of an infinite God that is infinitely spiritual, as we have said, and infinitely intelligent, infinitely perfect, with all the qualities that we may attribute to such a God. And this aspect of captivity and illusion and deception by a deceiver, according to what I came to discover, is the current situation in the dimension of consciousness that you and I are, where we believe that this material universe, which is so huge that light takes a period of 94 billion years to traverse across, that is a very huge and astronomical sort of distance. If you compare that light travels at 20 or 300,000 kilometers per second, if you multiply that by the number of seconds in a minute, by the number of seconds in a minute in an hour, number of hours in a day, number of days in a week, number of weeks in a month, number of months in a year, and number of years in 94 billion years, is those figures are so huge I can't even start to mention them here. But then that realm of reality, as much as it may even appear perfect, is not anything compared to the perfection of heaven, or the highest dimension of consciousness of an absolute being that constitutes of all intelligence. So for then man to start worshiping the creator of this material sense of reality is to worship the deceiver. And that is where I am. So I came to understand, as long as I am worshiping a creator of this material universe or cosmos that is nothing but chaotic in every way, where man suffers in every form, irrespective of who they are in the society, irrespective of their wealth, then I was worshiping the deceiver. And this is how now I have come to discover that there is a much more superior God, and I can't call him, I can't equate him, I can't sort of equate him to the God of Christians, or the God of Muslim, or the God of Hindus, or the God of Buddhists, or the God of any other religion in the world. Because any religion that does not tell us that this material sense of reality is an illusion and is not created by a perfect God, then they are not telling us about this infinitely perfect, with infinite qualities, infinite characteristics, infinite attributes, and generally an infinite nature, as the God that I've discovered. And therefore, my God is different from the God of Christians, from the God of Buddhists, from the God of Islam, and all the other gods. And this is the discovery that I have made. I will talk more about this infinite God. And I don't call him God. I don't even give him that name, because that name is limiting. The God of other religions is what I call an anthropomorphic God. A man-like God. That's the meaning of the word anthropomorphic. A man-like God. So mine is not a man like God. He's a spirit. He's a spirit like God. He's an intelligence like God. He's the infinite universal intelligence. And those are his qualities. He's the absolute being. And he is too perfect to create a world or a people in the manner that we are. But we were made perfectly as spiritual beings until we fell into a dream state of mind. And that's what my new religion is telling me. I will continue to discuss this with you, fellow listeners. In the meantime, continue to subscribe, to share with friends, to write comments, and come let us reason together. In the meantime, I will say adios, amigo.